Rhaenys Targaryen stood at the edge of the high balcony in the Red Keep. Her dark eyes narrowed against the late afternoon sun. Wisps of silvery hair escaped the confines of her netted headdress, stirring about her shoulders in the breeze that swept through the courtyard below. Beyond the towering walls, the city of King's Landing sprawled in a tumult of cramped houses and winding streets, all shimmering with the golden hue of nearing dusk. From here, the city resembled a painting, beautiful and still. But Rhaenys knew that beneath that veneer, a storm was coming. She drew a slow breath, her gaze fixed on the labyrinth of rooftops. For years she had placed her faith in Viserys' promise that Rhaenyra would follow him on the Iron Throne and that House Targaryen would remain united. She had quietly guarded her own doubts. Ever since the Great Council had chosen Viserys over her, she had learned how quickly promises could be overturned. Yet she had endured, in part because she believed in the good of the realm, in part because Corlys' ambitions had carried them onward, and in part because Viserys himself had been gracious and gentle with her family. He was not a man who courted conflict needlessly. But Viserys was gone now, his body still lying in state in the Great September, and everything would change at any moment. She remembered the day the council passed over her claim, an ache that had lodged itself deep, somewhere behind her ribcage. She had been the queen who never was, a bitter jest among the lords of the realm for so long that it had become almost second nature to her. She had not opposed Rhaenyra's naming. Why would she have? It was a small consolation that at least Viserys recognized women could inherit. Yet for all his stated beliefs, the kingdom had proven itself inflexible, unwilling to see a woman ascend, and that old wound, that older grievance, never stopped throbbing. Did the realm truly want a woman on the Iron Throne, or would it forever resist? In the skies above, the faint silhouette of a dragon's sword, a black shape against the sinking sun, the whoosh of wings carried on the wind. She wondered whose it was. So many Targaryens flew in and out of the Red Keep in these uncertain days. Rumors abounded that the crown would pass to Rhaenyra as Viserys intended. Yet whispering tongues claimed that Alicent Hightower and her brood also had designs. Aegon was the eldest son of Viserys, after all. The Greens, as some were calling them, had grown in power and influence. But how many of those same lords had once voiced the notion that the daughter of the rightful Targaryen line should reign? It was easy to speak of Rhaenyra as heir when Viserys was alive. Now he was dead, and the realm teetered on the cusp of civil war. Rhaenys turned from the balcony. Her bare footsteps echoed on the stone floor as she retreated inside, letting the tapestries brush at her skirts. She thought of how her cousin had once tried to mend old wounds, how he had tried to create a stable path forward. Now that path was in danger of collapsing. If Rhaenyra took the throne as planned, war might follow anyway. But was that any reason for Rhaenys to bury her own claims? House Velaryon still nursed a grievance that had never wholly healed. The slight at the Great Council, the disregard for her children's rightful place in the succession, the unstoppable march of tradition that told them to accept their lot and remain silent. For decades, Rhaenys had done just that. She had reared her children, supported Corlys in his voyages, stood back while Viserys and his council shaped the future. She had believed Rhaenyra's succession might break the centuries-old pattern, might finally do justice to her own near claim. But she was older now, and the realm had grown more divided, not less. The Hightowers gathered around Alicent's sons, while Rhaenyra and Daemon, newly wedded, seemed prepared to dig in their heels and fight. And in that tangle of ambitions, Rhaenys was forced to wonder if she must act to protect her blood, her line, and indeed the stability of Westeros itself. Perhaps, after all these years, the realm needed someone else on the throne. A different woman. A quiet knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, she saw Ser Steffan Darklyn, one of the Kingsguard loyal to Rhaenyra, standing in the corridor. His expression was grave. He bowed low. "My lady, Princess Rhaenyra has requested your presence in the Queen's solar." The courtesy in his tone was correct, but the tension around his eyes betrayed something else. Urgency. It was no surprise. Rhaenyra was doubtless gathering her closest supporters, wishing to secure the lines of loyalty before Alicent's party made any moves. Rhaenys nodded, though her heart quickened. "I will come," she said. "Lead the way." She followed Ser Stefan through winding corridors, watchers in every niche. The Red Keep always had the feeling of a place heavy with secrets. Even as they walked, she saw the silent stares of servants, the flicker of anxiousness behind every guarded face. The hush that pervaded the castle was ominous, as if everyone waited for an announcement that had yet to be uttered. Rhaenys had learned already of Viserys' final hours, how the king had struggled for breath, how the maesters had tried to ease his suffering with milk of the poppy. Rhaenyra had been by his side for those last days, or so they said. Others whispered Alicent had hovered close until the final night, not letting Rhaenyra get too near, or perhaps they both had. Rumors swirled. The truth was that he had died, and no one was certain what would come next. She wondered if Rhaenyra had discovered some new sign of treachery, or if she simply wished to confirm alliances. Whatever the reason, the tension made the air thick. They reached the Solar. Rhaenys took a moment before entering, letting her gaze sweep over the guards outside. Two men, both wearing the Targaryen sigil upon their chests, stepped aside with practiced bows. The door swung open, and she stepped into a room dimly lit by the last rays of sunlight. The thick aroma of incense hung in the air, cloying as it mingled with the faint tang of the chamber's warmed coals. Rhaenyra Targaryen stood near a table scattered with maps. She wore a black gown, simple yet elegant, and her silver-gold hair fell down her back in a thick braid. She looked up, and her eyes sparked with relief when she saw Rhaenys. At her side stood Daemon Targaryen, arms crossed over his chest, expression unreadable. Along the walls were a handful of loyal lords and knights, including Rhaenyra's children, Jacaerys and Lucerys, both standing stiffly in the background. Corlys Velaryon was conspicuously absent, still away or perhaps otherwise occupied. Rhaenys' heart clenched slightly at the thought. She always preferred to face these storms with her husband at her side. "Princess Rhaenys," Rhaenyra greeted, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming so swiftly." There was a tremor in her voice, something akin to exhaustion, but also determination. "We must speak urgently of the succession." So it began. Rhaenys inclined her head. "I am grieved at the passing of our king, my cousin. I would do anything to restore him to life for a day longer, were it in my power." Rhaenyra nodded, though her eyes seemed to blaze with a hidden fervor. "As would I. The realm has lost a good man." They both knew that Viserys' gentle nature had prevented open conflict for many years, perhaps only delayed it. Now the shape of the future was forging itself in the present moment. Daemon's gaze flickered to Rhaenys, but he said nothing. Rhaenys sensed the coiled tension in him, as always, but she sensed something else as well. Perhaps he was uncertain how she would respond. "I have called my most trusted allies," Rhaenyra said, gesturing to those assembled, "to reaffirm their oaths of fealty to me, sworn when I was named heir by my father. Yet I fear that Queen Alicent and her followers are planning to crown Aegon." "How certain is that?" Rhaenys asked, her voice calm. "Has word been sent from their side?" Rhaenyra's mouth tightened. "No official word, not yet, but I have eyes and ears throughout the Red Keep. They whisper that Alicent meets in secret with the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Ser Criston Cole, and that messages are being carried to certain lords in the city and beyond. They would not do this for no reason." Daemon's voice cut in, low and bristling. "If the Hightowers move quickly, they may try to seat Aegon on the throne before your father is even laid to rest in the crypts. We cannot allow that. We must gather our dragons, our men, before they dare to proclaim him king. The realm knows who Viserys named as his heir." Rhaenys watched them both. A silence fell heavy as all eyes turned her way. She was the eldest Targaryen woman, the survivor of the Great Council's slight. She outranked them in years and in experience. Rhaenyra was the named heir, yes, but it was well known that many in the realm looked upon Rhaenys as having had the stronger claim before. Some lords whispered that if the throne could pass to a woman, it should have been Rhaenys from the start. Others insisted that precedent was set at the Council of 101 AC, that Viserys had been chosen. That made Rhaenyra the rightful heir, they said. But illusions of fairness had already been broken for Rhaenys once. She maintained her composure. "I see. And you ask for my full support now, as well as that of House Valerion." Rhaenyra nodded, stepping closer. "You have always had my respect, Princess Rhaenys. You and Lord Corlys have been pillars of strength and loyalty. Once again, I must rely on you. The Seven Kingdoms need to see that the queen who never withstands behind the heir that King Viserys named. That unity would do much to quell the doubts that might arise." Rhaenys felt a pang deep in her chest. Unity, yes, but Rhaenyra did not speak of the old wound that overshadowed all of this. She had always relied on Rhaenys' acquiescence and had never truly questioned if that acquiescence might someday fail. It was as though the realm believed Rhaenys too old or too resigned to fight for her own place. She had been a mother, then a grandmother, but she was not so ancient that she could not still mount malaise if the sky demanded it. The silent flicker of that possibility stirred in her. She thought of her children and grandchildren. She thought of the hazard of war. She thought of the realm, which might soon be ravaged by dragonfire. Quietly, Rhaenys said, "And if it comes to open conflict, you will call your banners. Weigh our enemies? Set the realm on fire? Demons jaw set. We will do what we must. A usurper cannot be allowed to claim the throne without challenge. King Viserys' last wish must be upheld." Rhaenys glanced around the chamber. She saw the anxious expressions of the younger knights. She saw the resolute posture of Jacaerys, who looked so determined to do right by his mother. There was no question that the Blacks would fight if threatened. Perhaps they would attempt to secure alliances and possibly even avoid war. But once the lines were drawn, no one would shrink from violence. Finally, Rhaenys dipped her head. "I understand. My husband is not here to speak for himself, but you know my feelings. This matter is grave." She paused, choosing her words with care, her heart twisting inside her. "I offer my sympathies for your father's passing. I will need some time to consider carefully the best course for House Valerion, for my children, my grandchildren." She felt demon bristle at her evasiveness. Rhaenyra's face flickered with surprise. She might have expected an immediate pledge of loyalty, a fervent vow to stand by Rhaenyra's claim. But Rhaenys was offering something short of that. Rhaenyra's expression grew taut. "I would have your counsel then, Princess. I have always valued your wisdom. Do not doubt. We will do all in our power to keep the realm from descending into chaos." Rhaenys simply answered with a small bow of her head. "Thank you." And because she was too old to mince words, she added, "I will speak to you again soon, Princess." She took her leave, ignoring Daemon's cool stare as she swept from the solar. She knew he would suspect that her hesitation spelled trouble, but he was too proud to chase after her or question her intentions in front of everyone. As she walked, the emptiness of the corridors pressed upon her. Her footsteps rang hollow. She made her way to a suite of rooms where she and Corlys often lodged when at court. A single lamp burned within, and she settled onto a cushioned seat, letting her back rest against the carved wood. Her mind roiled with conflicting thoughts. She had no desire to see blood spilled for the throne. Yet, if that was the path set before them, could she see Rhaenyra on that throne if it meant war? Perhaps if Rhaenyra was certain to win, or if she truly had the support of the realm. But Rhaenys was no fool. She saw the simmering discontent among certain houses who would have preferred a male heir. It would be hard enough for Rhaenyra if the Greens were scattered and weakened. But they were not. The Hightowers were strong, and they had alliances in Old Town and beyond. If war erupted, it would ravage the Seven Kingdoms. And for what? The monarchy? The Targaryen bloodline? She stood and began to pace. It was possible that if she claimed her own right, enough of the realm would rally behind her to avoid a direct conflict between two younger claimants. She was older, yes, but she was the daughter of Prince Aemon, who had once been the heir apparent to King Jaehaerys. Her claim was no lesser than Viserys had once been. The great council that chose Viserys was not some unbreakable, holy law. It was a gathering of lords who made a decision for stability's sake. But now that stability was shattered. If Rhaenyra took up arms to enforce her claim over her brother by the second marriage, the realm might see a better alternative in Rhaenys herself. or they might despise her for raising the banner of dissent. But if House Valerion stood behind her, and if certain lords recognized that she was indeed a more experienced option, the possibilities made her head spin. She did not delude herself that it would be easy, but at her side stood Meleys, the Red Queen, swift and ferocious even as she aged, and House Valerion's navy, commanded by Corlys, was second to none. If she had Corlys' support, she could stand tall enough to challenge either faction. And perhaps she could lay down conditions that would spare the realm from a total meltdown of bloodshed. It was a risk, but not an unthinkable one. She blew out a breath, feeling the weight of that choice crush down upon her shoulders. There was no one in the room to advise her, no kindly cousin to confide in. Viserys had been that once, and though she questioned some of his choices, she had never doubted his love for his family as a whole. Now she had to decide alone. She left her rooms again, searching the castle for a figure she trusted above all others. The day had melted into evening, torches flickering in sconces. She glimpsed the hush of servants clearing the halls, finishing their day's tasks, hurrying past her with lowered gazes. She suspected that by dawn, the tension in the Red Keep might crack wide open. Time was short. At last, she found Lord Corlys in a small gallery near the throne room, accompanied by two of his sworn sailors. A tall, imposing man with salt and pepper hair, Corlys wore an expression of quiet deliberation as she approached. He dismissed the two men, who bowed to both of them, then left. Rhaenys inclined her head to her husband, and he responded with a tilt of his own. She could see in his eyes the question. Had she already pledged House Valerion to Rhaenyra's cause? But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "How fares the princess?" "She is determined," Rhaenys replied, letting her voice remain neutral. "She calls her banners and demands all reaffirmation of oaths. She is convinced Alicent will crown Aegon soon." Corlys exhaled. "I see." He glanced toward the towering door that led into the grand throne room, sealed at this late hour. "And what do? We have always been aligned with Rhaenyra, for the sake of Laena's children. We still have our grandchildren to consider." A pang of grief for Laenor flickered through Rhaenys, though the years had eased that particular wound. Still, she remembered him, bright-eyed and full of laughter. Her gaze dropped. "Yes, we do. And we have our future, the future of our house. This war that looms, it does not seem avoidable, does it?" Corlys pursed his lips. "We can hope to avoid a full war if we stand firmly behind Rhaenyra. Maybe the lords will bend the knee if they see a united front. Or we can try to remain neutral until the dust settles. But neutrality in a Targaryen conflict is seldom wise." The sense of the sword's edge pressed upon her. "I have another thought," she said softly. "You know it already in your heart. What if I were to press my own claim?" Corlys did not speak for a moment. He studied his wife as if weighing her words. "It is a dangerous path," he said finally, "to defy both Rhaenyra and the Greens. We could find ourselves friendless." Rhaenys felt her spine straighten, that regal carriage that came so naturally to her. "Not if we find allies who fear the coming storm. Some might see me as a compromise candidate, one who can heal the old rifts. If the realm is given two choices, Aegon or Rhaenyra, perhaps a third choice would be embraced by lords desperate to avoid war. Do not forget, once the Great Council was poised to name me before they named Viserys. There were many who believed I was the rightful heir. And if a woman is to claim the throne now, as Rhaenyra has shown is possible, I might appear the more rightful candidate." Corlys said nothing for a moment. She saw his mind churning behind his gaze. He had always supported her implicitly, lamenting the injustice done to her at the council. But claiming the throne outright was another matter. "Would we truly spare the realm from war?" he asked quietly. "Or would we only make it 3 claimants instead of 2? "We would have to be quick," Rhaenys answered. "Seize the momentum, secure King's Landing, if possible. Stand in the Dragon Pit, proclaim ourselves the rightful line. Force Rhaenyra and Alicent's party to yield by the sheer weight of that claim. Perhaps they would see sense. Or at least we might force a negotiation." Corlys's expression was grave. You think Rhaenyra would concede her claim? She is not one to bend easily, not now. Rhaenys felt the old bitterness rise within her like a swirl of smoke. She is young. She has believed herself heir for so long, and she is half in love with the notion of inheriting her father's seat. I do not know if she would concede, but there is a chance. And better that the realm place its trust in one who has weathered enough storms to know caution. If she fights me, well, that is her choice. But perhaps if she sees that many of the realm's great lords prefer me to her, she will step aside. Corlys let out a soft breath, shifting his weight. He looked over his shoulder, as though ensuring they were alone. This is not a small thing, Rhaenys. If we do this, we cannot go back to the way things were. Rhaenyra will see it as betrayal. The Greens will see you as a threat as well. We will be forging our own path. For a moment, Rhaenys felt the weight of years pressing upon her, as though all her life had been building to this juncture. She recalled the shock of that great council's verdict, how she and Corlys had stood, fury, burning in their hearts, while the lords cheered Viserys. She had accepted it in the name of peace, in the name of family. Now she wondered if that had been an error, or if the realm would have suffered a generation earlier had she pressed the matter. Yet the realm suffered now anyway. Perhaps it was time for her to set things to right. She stepped closer to him and laid a hand upon his arm. If we do nothing, we watch Rhaenyra and Aegon fight. Do you want our grandchildren in the midst of that? Jacaerys, Lucerys, Baela, Rhaena, all drawn into a war that might tear them apart? If you and I can stand for the throne, perhaps the realm will accept a more seasoned hand. Perhaps that will avert the worst of it. Corlys let his hand rest over hers. We would need to move swiftly, publicly, and we would need to claim it in a way that gave less cause for the realm to doubt. The Hightowers will move quickly too. They might try to lock down the Red Keep and the City Watch. She nodded. Then we do this soon. Tonight or tomorrow we must strike. Let me speak with certain lords who might be sympathetic. We can rally their support. And you, my love, must speak with your sailors and your captains in the harbor. Ensure we control Blackwater Bay if it comes to it. If the Greens cannot land forces easily, that might give us the upper hand here. Corlys' eyes gleamed with resolve. Then I will do what must be done. They stood together for a moment in a hush, their hearts drumming with anticipation. Then, with a brisk nod, Corlys strode away to set things in motion, leaving Rhaenys alone in the gallery. She stared at the sculpted pillars that soared overhead and tried to steady her breathing. She felt a swirl of guilt, for she had been fond of Rhaenyra, and she knew that Rhaenyra would feel betrayed. But Rhaenys could not bury that old wound forever. She had watched quietly for too long. And if there was even the smallest chance that her stepping forward would spare the realm a violent civil war, she had to seize it. The following morning dawned cloudy, a gray pall hanging over King's Landing. The city was subdued in mourning for the king, yet beneath that solemn facade, tension crackled. Soldiers patrolled the streets in greater numbers, and the watchmen at the gates seemed more alert. Among the common folk, rumors spread that the lords were quarreling over the succession, that the princess and the queen dowager were locked in a silent standoff. Mourners in black drifted to the Great September to pay respects to Viserys' body, laid out in regal splendor. Meanwhile, quiet riders came and went from the Red Keep. In the courtyard just outside the Red Keep's main gate, Rhaenys arrived on foot, garbed in a deep burgundy cloak lined with plush fur, the hood drawn up over her hair. Beside her was Corlys, wearing the proud seahorse sigil of House Velaryon on his doublet. A small retinue of Velaryon guards stood behind them, each bearing the house's banner. Normally, there would be no reason for such a gathering at this hour, but Rhaenys had summoned a number of lords and knights whom she believed might be sympathetic or at least open-minded. It was a subtle gathering for the moment, so as not to alert the entire castle. She caught sight of Lord Staunton, an older man who had once supported her at the Great Council. He inclined his head respectfully. Another was Lord Grafton of Gulltown, who had pragmatic reasons for wanting a stable monarchy that favored trade, something Corlys' power at sea might influence. Others trickled in with uncertain looks, perhaps drawn more by curiosity than loyalty, but Rhaenys knew she must make an impression upon them all. She glanced at Corlys, who gave her a faint nod. At a gesture from one of his captains, a swirl of activity began. Wordlessly, they passed through the gates and made their way into the castle grounds. The guards recognized Corlys and Rhaenys, but confusion flickered across their faces at the larger assembly. They did not stop them, however. Rhaenys felt her pulse quicken. She was about to set foot on a path she could never turn back from. They passed along stone corridors, heading for the Great Hall. The hush of their footfalls mixed with the rattle of arms carried by the Valyrian men. A few of the castle staff darted out of the way, startled. Once they reached the broad doors of the throne room, they found them guarded by 4 men of the city watch. The captain of the watch stepped forward, looking wary. "My lords, my lady, what is your business here this morning?" Corlys lifted his chin. "We are here to see that the Iron Throne remains secure during this time of grief." "Stand aside, Captain." The watchmen hesitated, uncertain, but they had no direct orders preventing the passage of a royal princess. And Rhaenys, for her part, fixed them with a regal stare. "We are here under the authority of the crown. Open the doors." One of the watchmen swallowed hard and turned to push open the great doors. They swung inward, revealing the cavernous throne room, its high windows casting weak morning light upon the cold floor. At the far end loomed the Iron Throne itself, a jagged mass of fused swords. Rhaenys' heart thrummed as she stepped into that hall. She remembered herself as a much younger woman, standing in this very place, hoping the Great Council might name her to that seat. And now she had returned, older, sterner, uncertain but resolute in her decision. The chamber was nearly empty, save for a few functionaries and guards. They turned in surprise, eyes widening at the procession of Valyrian men. From a side door, Rhaenyra and Daemon emerged, flanked by 2 Kingsguard in white cloaks. It was clear they had been conferring privately. Rhaenyra's expression was one of shock, quickly replaced by suspicion as she noticed the armed men with Rhaenys. "Aunt," Rhaenyra addressed, voice cool. "What is the meaning of this?" Rhaenys moved forward, letting the hood of her cloak fall away. "Princess," she began, "I come to claim what the Council of 101 AC once denied me. For the good of the realm, I will present myself as the rightful heir of King Viserys, as the daughter of Prince Aemon Targaryen and elder cousin to the late king. My claim stands above that of his children, for I was passed over wrongfully in the first place." A hush fell over the hall. Rhaenyra looked dumbfounded. Daemon's eyes flared with anger. One of the Kingsguard gripped his sword hilt, uncertain. Rhaenyra took a step forward, her posture rigid. "You cannot be serious, my lady. My father named me heir. You have known this for years. You accepted it." Rhaenys lifted her chin, ignoring the pang of guilt that lanced her. "I accepted many things for the sake of family unity. Yet I was named the queen who never was by a council that feared to place a woman upon the throne. If we are truly to allow a woman to rule, then I am the senior claim. I have the blood of King Jaehaerys' eldest son. That cannot be undone by the realm's oversight." Daemon's voice rasped with hostility. "This is madness. You betray my wife and your own kin. Do you mean to make yourself a usurper, much like Alicent and her brood?" Rhaenys' eyes flashed. "I am not a usurper, Daemon Targaryen. It is not usurpation to claim what was once rightfully mine. I do this for the realm's peace, before the Greens can set Aegon upon the throne and plunge us into war. If the lords see that there is a better elder claim, one that is seasoned and tested, they might unite behind me and avert a bloody conflict." Rhaenyra shook her head, her cheeks coloring with anger. "You will only create more division. You speak of avoiding war, but this can only stir new chaos. The lords already know me to be heir. They have sworn to uphold my claim." There was a rustling as the gathered lords behind Rhaenys shifted. Some cast uncertain looks in Rhaenyra's direction, others studied Rhaenys with calculation. Corlys stood quietly at his wife's shoulder, arms folded, a tower of silent support. Rhaenys took a measured breath. I beg to differ, princess. The realm is uneasy about a woman's rule, and many are unsure if they prefer you or your half-brother Aegon, who is, by law, the eldest male. They are torn, but they might accept me as the rightful heir once they recall the injustice done to me. I do this not to strike at you personally, but to save the 7 kingdoms from a war between Targaryens that could tear it all asunder. Rhaenyra's composure threatened to break. She looked to Daemon, who was already bristling, his hand resting on the hilt of Dark Sister. She returned her gaze to Rhaenys. And if I do not stand aside, you would fight me? Rhaenys swallowed, determined not to quail. I hope it will not come to that. I would have you recognize my right, and in return I would place you high in my council. You are my cousin's daughter, and I would not cast you aside. A bitter laugh escaped Daemon. You speak of magnanimity after betrayal. A fine jest. For a moment, Rhaenyra said nothing, only stared at Rhaenys. Anger warred with sorrow in her eyes. Then she spoke, her voice shaking with outrage. When my father named me heir, you did not object. You stood silent. You let me carry that torch all these years. Now you pounce when he is barely cold, when the Greens threaten to steal the throne. It feels like betrayal indeed. Rhaenys could not deny the cruelty of it, but it had to be done. Circumstances have changed. The realm stands upon a knife's edge. I do only what I must. Rhaenyra's gaze darted to the lords who lingered behind Rhaenys. She recognized some who had once supported Rhaenys in the Great Council. Her voice grew thick. Did my father's word truly mean so little? In her chest, Rhaenys felt an ache, but she held firm. I do not question King Viserys' love for you, but your father's word was overshadowed by an earlier injustice. I must correct that now, for the good of us all. A hush fell, and then Daemon snarled under his breath, turning to bark orders at the Kingsguard. Close the doors. Summon more guards. He glared at Corlys. My lord, stand aside. This is madness. Corlys stepped forward, posture unyielding. Your Grace, I have always respected you, but my wife's claim cannot be denied. House Valerion stands behind her. It was we who were wronged at the Great Council, we who watched the crown pass to Viserys while Rhaenys was just as worthy. If we are to have a queen, let it be the one who was first in line. You are forging your own destruction, Daemon hissed. We do not stand alone, you know that. The City Watch will answer to the rightful crown, which Rhaenyra wields. But even as he spoke, the throne room doors banged shut behind the Valerion guards, who stationed themselves on the inside, forcibly clearing out the few watchers who had stood in the corners. The City Watch that had been posted outside were uncertain, their captain looking for instructions. Rhaenyra's Kingsguard stepped closer to her, uncertain whether to draw swords. The tension was as thick as a storm cloud. Yet Rhaenys stepped forward, stopping at the base of the elevated platform that led to the Iron Throne. She stared up at that seat of swords. She could feel its magnetic pull, the significance of a century's worth of conquests and rulings. She raised her voice so that all present could hear. I, Rhaenys of House Targaryen, daughter of Prince Aemon, do here proclaim my right as the firstborn descendant of King Jaehaerys' eldest son. I claim the Iron Throne by virtue of that blood, and I declare that the 7 kingdoms shall have me as their queen, if they wish to avert the bloodshed that otherwise looms. She turned slowly, letting her gaze sweep the small cluster of onlookers. Let any who would dispute this speak now, or remain silent and let us find a peaceful path forward. Rhaenyra's nostrils flared, tears glimmering in her eyes as she fought to contain her fury. This is not a peaceful path, she said, her voice trembling. You have forced your way in here with armed men, threatened me in my father's throne room. I have threatened no one, Rhaenys replied calmly, nor do I ask you to kneel if you truly believe in your claim. But I urge you to think, princess. The realm is poised for war. Your half-brother claims the throne. You would fight. Perhaps if the lords saw that I, a senior line, stand ready to assume the throne, it would remove their reason to support your half-brother. They would see that a strong adult woman, with the realm's best interests at heart, can guide Westeros. I ask you to remember that House Targaryen is bigger than either you or Aegon." Daemon spat on the floor at that. "All I hear is ambition, veiled by excuses." One of the lords behind Rhaenys, Lord Staunton, stepped forward uncertainly. "My Lady Rhaenys, I supported you all those years ago. I still hold your claim dear. But is this the moment? With the king barely in his grave, can we not first settle any talk of Prince Aegon's usurpation?" Rhaenys faced him. "This is the only moment. The Greens move even now. If we do not act, we will lose the chance to avert war before it begins." She turned a stern gaze upon Daemon. "You say ambition, but what of Rhaenyra's ambition to sit the throne? Or Aegon's? Will you claim they are free of the same? If it must be a Targaryen woman upon the throne, I am the elder. Thus, for the sake of the realm, I demand that right." Corlys stepped beside her, voicing his support. "House Velaryon will not allow any harm to come to its rightful queen. The seas are ours. We will blockade any who attempt to land forces against her." Rhaenyra let out a broken breath. "You have planned this out quite thoroughly. How long have you schemed behind my back?" Rhaenys felt another stab of guilt. "It need not remain a scheme. Stand with me, Rhaenyra, and we can avert the Green's cunning. I promise you a place of honor, second only to myself, if you will unite our houses in this cause. This is not personal animosity. I do not seek to shame you. I seek to guide the realm as I once should have." Rhaenyra opened her mouth, then closed it, anguish churning in her eyes. She glanced at Daemon, who shook his head vehemently. They whispered to each other, tension coiling tight. Then Rhaenyra turned back. "I cannot. My father's word was law, and that law named me heir. I will not yield." Rhaenys exhaled softly. "Then I truly am sorry." With that, she ascended the first few steps of the throne's dais. A hush fell over the chamber as her steps echoed on the stone. The Velaryon guards fanned out, forming a defensive line. Daemon's hand tightened on his sword, but he did not yet draw it, possibly because of the overwhelming presence of Velaryon men. Rhaenyra looked as though she was wrestling between heartbreak and fury. Rhaenys reached the Iron Throne. She placed a hand upon the metal, feeling its cold edges beneath her palm. Once, long ago, she had almost approached it with the certain knowledge that it would be hers. That moment had been stolen by the Great Council. Now, in the hush of a single morning, with no official coronation or fanfare, she took her seat. The steel pricked at her back as she settled, the high seat looming around her. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced her expression to remain composed. She glanced out over those assembled, trying to project that regal calm her grandfather Jaehaerys had once embodied. "I do not ask for your swords immediately," she announced. "I only ask that you do not stand in my way as I strive to bring order. Let us gather the lords of the realm. Let them hear my claim. Let them decide if they would see me seated or tear the realm apart with bloodshed." Some of the lords behind her, those who had arrived in her retinue, dropped to one knee, heads bowed. Others remained standing, uncertain, glancing at Rhaenyra. For her part, the princess stood stiff as a statue. After a moment, she turned on her heel and strode away, Daemon following, seething with fury. The king's guard trailed after them, though two paused to look back, perhaps questioning their oaths. Did their vow to protect the rightful Targaryen heir bind them to Rhaenys or Rhaenyra? But Daemon barked an order and they followed him. In that moment, Rhaenys realized she had successfully taken the Iron Throne, at least for this morning. But if Rhaenyra refused to yield, if Aegon refused to yield, then Westeros had 3 Targaryen claimants. The result might be an even worse conflagration than the dance she had hoped to prevent. Yet perhaps, just perhaps, some of the realm's mightiest houses would see the sense in her claim. They might unite behind her and force Rhaenyra and Aegon to stand down. It was a fragile hope, but it was all she had now. She glanced down at Corlys, who gazed up at her from the floor of the throne room. In his eyes, she saw pride tempered by concern, and she lifted her chin. She could not show fear now. She would not. At midday, word spread through the castle that Rhaenys Targaryen had taken the Iron Throne. that the Valerian men guarded the entrance to the Great Hall, and that Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Daemon had retreated to their own apartments in a fury. Even the city outside began to buzz with rumors. Had a new queen truly ascended? Was Rhaenyra cast aside? Did the Hightowers know of this development? Alicent Hightower was said to be in seclusion, planning to crown Aegon soon. But now this curve in the road threatened to upset every plan. For hours, the castle corridors saw envoys hurrying to and fro. Lords demanded admittance to the queen, whichever queen they recognized, and hushes fell wherever the name Rhaenys was spoken. Was the Red Queen's rider truly in power at last? Rhaenyra, for her part, paced in her chambers while Daemon stood near the window, arms folded. The children hovered nearby, frightened and uncertain. Jacaerys had asked if they should gather the dragons, if they should challenge Rhaenys in the sky. But Rhaenyra had refused to give such an order. Yet, she was still reeling, trying to comprehend how her beloved aunt could do this. Corlys must have planned it, Daemon spat. He saw his chance to seat her on the throne, and he took it. With the royal fleet at his back, he may control the harbor. We have Caraxes, we have Syrax, we have dragons. But do we have enough men to defeat the entire Valerian navy? Rhaenyra clenched her fists, her gut burning with betrayal. We have the city watch, do we not? Daemon gave a bitter laugh. That remains to be seen. If the watch commander sees that Rhaenys has planted herself on the throne, he may not risk open confrontation until it is clear who stands to win. A fury stormed within Rhaenyra. I am his rightful queen, named by my father. The watch took oaths to the crown. Oaths can be twisted, Daemon answered. We must move swiftly, or we lose the initiative. And do what? Storm the throne room. She shook her head, pressing her palms to her temples. That would be madness. The Valerians are cunning, and I do not want to kill my own kin. Daemon's voice rose. But she is the one betraying you. What would you have us do instead? Talk her into leaving quietly. Rhaenyra shot him a glare. You think I haven't considered flying to the dragon pit and mounting Syrax to burn her from the throne? But she is my blood. I cannot do that. Not yet. She closed her eyes, wrestling with the swirl of emotions. She might still yield if enough lords stand by me. We must gather our strength. Send ravens to every major house that has sworn loyalty to me. Summon them here. Let them see the truth. Daemon exhaled angrily. And if she calls her own council, demands the lords come to her side, we risk them turning. The old wounds of the great council may still fester. Rhaenyra opened her eyes, determination burning within them. Then we must ensure they do not turn. Let us meet with her, publicly if need be, before the assembled lords. I will not forfeit my crown without a fight, but if she is determined to claim it, let her prove that her cause is just in the eyes of the realm. Daemon looked as though he wanted to protest, but he finally gave a curt nod. Very well, but do not expect she will cave easily. Corlys is too ambitious for that. Rhaenyra's voice broke slightly. We shall see. Meanwhile, word reached Alicent Hightower that Rhaenys had seized the throne, and the Queen Dowager's composure nearly deserted her. She had planned carefully for weeks, waiting to place a crown upon Aegon's head. Now, Rhaenys' shocking move might ruin everything. Alicent clasped her hands together in a tight knot, pacing her chambers while Ser Criston Cole stood at attention, armor gleaming. This is unacceptable, Alicent fumed. A usurper has flung herself upon the throne in King's Landing, and we have not even had the chance to crown Aegon. The city is in turmoil. The Valerians block the Blackwater with their ships. If we attempt to bring in our allies from Old Town, they may be turned away. Ser Criston Cole's voice was steady. We must strike swiftly, my queen. Crown Prince Aegon in the Dragon Pit. Proclaim him the rightful king and rally the lords to him. Let them see that Rhaenys is an old woman whose time has passed. A queen that never was. Alicent clenched her jaw. Yes, we must. But we must also be wary of Rhaenyra. She has not yielded her claim. If Rhaenyra and Rhaenys unite, we are finished. At that, Criston Cole allowed himself a tight smile. From what my sources say, they are at odds. Rhaenys has essentially declared Rhaenyra's claim void. They will not unite easily. We must exploit this rift, show the lords that House Targaryen is in disarray, and only Aegon can restore order. Alicent forced a breath to steady herself. Very well. Prepare the ceremonies at once. Gather the small council loyal to me. We will anoint Aegon, seat him upon the throne. Rhaenys cannot hold it by sheer force. Her claim was dismissed once. It can be dismissed again. Criston Cole bowed, the flicker of ambition in his eyes. Yes, my queen. Throughout the castle, tension thickened. Courtiers and guards found themselves caught between three possible claimants. Some tried to guess which side would prevail, others hoped for a miracle that would prevent war. Ravens were dispatched to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, each side appealing to the great houses. The city watch parted to let the different factions move, uncertain who held true authority. Meanwhile, the common folk whispered that the Targaryens had gone mad, that the old prophecy about dragons consuming themselves in flame was coming to pass. In the throne room, Rhaenys held a makeshift court, seated upon the iron throne with Corlys beside her. She listened to petitioners who came with confusion etched on their faces. Some recognized her authority, at least outwardly. Others expressed caution, not wishing to offend her while her men guarded the hall. She answered as graciously as she could, trying to project confidence and justice. Yet a tight coil of dread twisted in her stomach. She had the throne, but for how long? When the great doors opened, admitting Rhaenyra and Daemon with a small retinue, the chatter in the throne room fell silent. The tension crackled in the air. Rhaenys lifted her head, her face an unreadable mask. Rhaenyra walked forward, posture regal, wearing a gown of black embroidered with red. Daemon followed at her shoulder, dark sister visibly sheathed at his hip. Rhaenyra's voice rang through the hall. "Aunt, we must speak, for the sake of our house and the realm." Rhaenys inclined her head, gesturing for the petitioners to step aside. "Very well. You shall be heard, princess." Rhaenyra approached the throne, stopping at a respectful distance. The hush in the chamber was absolute. "I have sent word to the lords of the realm, reminding them of their sworn oaths to uphold my father's decree that I am his heir. Yet I do not wish for bloodshed within these walls. You and I are kin. Let us resolve this." Rhaenys' voice was steady. "That is precisely why I have stepped forward, Rhaenyra, to resolve the tension and prevent the Greens from seizing power. If you would but see that I have the stronger claim—" "There is no stronger claim," Rhaenyra interrupted, though she kept her tone controlled. "My father was king. He named me heir. The entire realm saw it." Rhaenys tilted her head. "And before that, a great council was called to decide the succession under King Jaehaerys. They looked at my father's line and that of my uncle Balon. They wrongfully chose to place Balon's son Viserys ahead of me, the daughter of the elder prince. That was the realm's first mistake, and it led to this. I simply rectify it now." Rhaenyra's jaw tensed. "And you believe that sets aside my father's royal decree? The realm accepted me as his heir for years." Rhaenys let a moment's silence linger, her gaze holding Rhaenyra's. "The realm accepted it because Viserys was living and they did not wish to oppose him. But the realm was never wholeheartedly behind a female heir. The moment a male contender emerged, it all fell into doubt. Do you not see? We are repeating the same mistakes. Another generation will spill blood if we do not find a rightful solution. I offer that solution." Daemon opened his mouth to retort, but Rhaenyra held up a hand. She took a small step forward, ignoring the ripple of unease among the Valyrian guards. Her voice softened, addressing Rhaenys almost in a plea. "Aunt, I beg you, let us stand together against Aegon. The Greens seek to steal my throne. If your desire is truly to avoid war, then unite with me. We can bring them to heel before they muster. I would honor you as the king's cousin, the elder lady of House Targaryen, a pillar of my reign." Rhaenys felt the rawness in Rhaenyra's tone and the sincerity behind it. For a moment, she was nearly swayed by the memory of the young girl Rhaenyra had been, so full of hope. But Rhaenys could not simply yield. She had not come this far to abandon her cause in a single moment of sentiment. She steadied her breath, recalling all the years she had been denied. "If you truly wish peace," she said, "then yield your claim. Let the lords accept me. Let us defy the Greens by giving them no reason to rally behind a male. They cannot claim that you, a woman, are usurping the male line if I, the rightful daughter of Aemon, stand upon the throne." Rhaenyra's eyes flashed. "I cannot do that. I am sorry." A regretful sadness swept over Rhaenys' features. "Then we have nothing more to say." Rhaenyra's grief mingled with anger, and she stepped back, her face pale. Daemon's glare promised a reckoning. The pair turned, cloak hems swirling across the stone floor as they departed. The watchers in the throne room whispered among themselves. Rhaenys' heart felt heavy. She had hoped Rhaenyra might see reason, or might choose not to fight family. But Targaryens were proud, and all of this was a collision of that pride. Within hours, the tension escalated further. Rhaenyra's loyal retainers prepared to fortify her position in the Red Keep, while Rhaenys' men consolidated their hold on the throne room and certain corridors. Alicent Hightower, learning of the conflict, hastened to crown Aegon in the Dragon Pit. Rumor said it would happen at dawn the next day. Thus, King's Landing braced itself for 3 Targaryens to claim the throne in the span of 2 days. That night, Rhaenys removed her ceremonial cloak, exchanging it for more practical attire of black and red cloth. She could not rest, though the hour was late. She walked alone through the dark corridors, malaise stirring in her thoughts. If it came to it, she would mount her dragon in the sky above King's Landing to defend her claim. But was that truly the path she had wanted? Or had she only wanted to ensure that the realm did not tear itself apart between 2 lesser claims? She found herself in a deserted courtyard, the moonlight casting pale shadows. There, standing near a balustrade, was a figure wearing a simple cloak. Baela Targaryen, her granddaughter by Daemon and Lena. Baela had grown into a strong-willed young woman, and she had come to court recently. Rhaenys approached, footsteps quiet on the stones. Baela turned at the sound and gave her grandmother a guarded look. There was love in her eyes, but also confusion and hurt. "Grandmother," she said softly. "Baela," Rhaenys greeted. She paused, uncertain how to begin. "Why are you out here at this hour?" Baela's jaw flexed. "I might ask you the same." After a hesitation, she said, "Why have you done this? You and my father have always been at odds, but I did not think you would usurp Rhaenyra. She loves and respects you. She always has." Rhaenys felt a pang in her heart. "It is not about love or respect," she said gently. "It is about the survival of the realm. Rhaenyra's claim would lead to war with the Greens. My claim might unify the realm behind one who was once passed over." Baela's brow furrowed, tears gathering in her eyes though she fought them back. "Do you really believe that? Or do you just want the throne that was denied you?" Rhaenys let out a slow breath. She could not wholly deny the personal longing, the decades of injustice that fueled her. "Both," she admitted. "I will not lie to you, child. I believe I was wronged. But I also believe that if the lords see a wise, older Targaryen queen, they might rally to me and spurn Aegon's hasty coronation. Then Rhaenyra would not have to fight either. The realm might heal." Baela looked away, struggling with emotion. "But what if Rhaenyra decides to fight you? You know my father, he will not yield to a slight. And Rhaenyra, she's always been told she is the heir. Now you want to take it from her." Rhaenys reached out, gently placing a hand on Baela's shoulder. "I do not want bloodshed with my own kin, but if they choose to defy me, they make that choice themselves. I can only offer them a place in my realm. What more can I do?" Baela's eyes were bright with tears. "End this. Step down. Unite with her. We can face the Greens as one." A wave of old resentment rose in Rhaenys. "That is exactly what they once said to me. Step aside gracefully, for the good of the realm. Let the male line inherit. I have lived my entire life in the shadow of that wrong. Now, the realm would again pass over me in favor of a younger Targaryen woman. I cannot endure that." She removed her hand, seeing the heartbreak in Baela's face. "I hope you will not hate me," Rhaenys murmured, voice husky. I know you love Rhaenyra, you have grown close to her, but I must do what I believe is right." Baela clenched her fists at her sides. "I can never hate you, grandmother, but I don't understand how this can lead to anything but tragedy." Rhaenys said nothing for a moment, only looking at the slender form of her granddaughter silhouetted in the moonlight. "It may be that we Targaryens are cursed. Our dragons have always been both power and doom. But I must try, Baela. I must try to break the cycle." Baela swallowed, tears slipping down her cheeks. She bowed her head. "I pray you succeed, then, for all our sakes." She turned and fled, leaving Rhaenys alone. The older woman closed her eyes, listening to the distant murmur of the wind. The city's lights glimmered below, and beyond that, the dark waters of Blackwater Bay. She felt tears in her own eyes, but she did not let them fall. She had made her choice. At dawn, the Red Keep exploded with noise. Word spread that Aegon Targaryen was to be crowned in the Dragon Pit. Trumpets blared, and lords who favored the Greens rushed to attend. The small council loyal to Alicent had orchestrated everything, unveiling the long-kept secret that Viserys allegedly wished his son Aegon to succeed. The spectacle was grand. Hundreds filled the stands, including members of the City Watch who had been bribed or otherwise commanded to show. Alicent stood with Ser Criston Cole, presenting the crown of Aegon the Conqueror. Yet as Aegon stepped forth, uncertain and hungover from a night of indulgence, the crowd offered only scattered cheers. The overshadowing presence of Rhaenys in the Red Keep weighed heavily, and some in the city had grown fond of Rhaenyra, the realm's delight once upon a time. The tension was palpable, but the Greens pushed through and Aegon was crowned. The day had begun with 3 Targaryens laying claim to the Iron Throne. By midday, 1,000 rumors spread across the city, that Rhaenys had seized the throne, that Rhaenyra was the rightful heir, that Aegon had been crowned in the Dragon Pit. Confusion reigned. The populace knew only that something terrible was on the horizon. Rhaenys, upon hearing of Aegon's coronation, seated quietly upon the throne. Corlys paced at the foot of the dais. "We must respond," he said. "If they are crowning him now, they will call the banners to force the city to accept him." Rhaenys nodded, her face like stone. "Send out riders and ravens at once, proclaiming my own coronation. Let all the lords know I am prepared to accept their fealty, or they risk aligning themselves with an usurper. Summon them to King's Landing." She paused, her gaze traveling to the side, where a few loyal lords stood. "Ensure the City Watch is informed that any attempt by Aegon's men to seize the Red Keep will be met with force." Corlys bowed, then strode off to dispatch the orders. Rhaenys sat stiffly, the edges of the throne pressing into her. She had not undergone a formal coronation in front of the masses yet, but in her mind, it was only a matter of time. If Aegon dared to style himself king of the Undulls and the Rhoynar, she would not let it stand uncontested. High on a parapet, Daemon and Rhaenyra watched the city churn. Rhaenyra clenched her hands on the cold stone, her knuckles whitening. Aegon is crowned, and Rhaenys sits in the throne room. The City Watch is divided, the people are frightened, and the realm is fracturing. Daemon exhaled, the wind catching tendrils of his hair. "We can still come out on top. We have dragons more than either Rhaenys or Aegon, should it come to an open field. We can claim the skies." Rhaenyra felt her stomach knot. "And so it will be war with Targaryens fighting Targaryens." Daemon placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "There was always going to be war, my love. Viserys' attempts to keep the peace were doomed once Alicent bore him sons. Now it is only made more tangled by Rhaenys' ambition. But in the end we shall be the victors. We have the rightful claim. We have the dragons. The lords will choose us over an old woman who was passed over, or a drunken boy who can barely hold a sword." She stared at him, a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. "Is that truly our path, then? Slaughtering my aunt? She is the mother of my kin, my cousins. And she was once dear to me." Daemon's face hardened. "She has sealed her fate. If she stands in our way, if she persists in calling herself queen, we will show her no mercy." Rhaenyra's heart twisted, but she forced herself to remain strong. Then so be it. Below them, the city streets began to fill with the sound of marching boots as the watchers loyal to Aegon tried to assert control in certain districts, while pockets of men loyal to Rhaenyra or Rhaenys resisted. So began a slow burn of open conflict that threatened to tear King's Landing asunder. The stench of fear and the clang of steel drifted on the breeze. Come evening, Rhaenys prepared to retire from the throne room. She had spent the day receiving envoys and dispatching her own. The weight of a crown, an invisible one so far, already pressed upon her. As she rose from the throne, she winced slightly when a jagged blade caught her sleeve, slicing her forearm. The throne had claimed its first blood from her. She suppressed a grimace, letting the old superstition pass through her mind, that the throne would cut unworthy kings or queens. Was it an omen, or merely the hazard of the seat's design? She refused to think too deeply on it. She was about to descend the steps when a harried messenger ran into the chamber. "My queen," the man said, breathless. "Forgive me, but we have heard that the Greens are massing in the city. There was a skirmish in Flea Bottom. Several watchmen loyal to you were killed by men shouting that Aegon was the true king." Rhaenys' face darkened. "Then the war has begun in earnest." She looked to Corlys, who had overheard. "We must be ready to defend the Red Keep." Corlys nodded, pressing his lips thin. "I will rally the men and secure the gates. The city watch is still divided, but enough should stand with us." He left swiftly, shouting orders to his captains. Rhaenys followed at a measured pace, flanked by Valyrian guards. Her mind raced. This was not how she had hoped it would unfold. She had wanted a peaceful acceptance of her claim, not bloodshed in the streets. But once again, Targaryen ambition lit a fire beneath King's Landing. Perhaps she had been naive to hope otherwise. She stepped out into the darkening courtyard, the torches casting flickering orange light across the cobblestones. In the distance, she could hear shouts and screams as chaos gripped parts of the city. She smelled smoke drifting on the wind, not yet thick but enough to signal that houses might be aflame. War had arrived faster than she anticipated. Her guards led her through a side passage that would take her to her private chambers. She paused when she saw a shape loom in the sky. At first, it was only a black silhouette against the last purple remnants of dusk. Then a roar shattered the night, sending a cold wave of dread through the courtyard. A dragon, not Meleys. She could sense that. Meleys was stabled in the dragon pit and would not be released without her command, unless someone defied her. But this was Carax's or perhaps another. A second roar echoed, accompanied by the sound of a second set of massive wings. Rhaenys' pulse quickened. Dragons in the sky at night could only mean that Rhaenyra and Daemon, or possibly another Targaryen, were taking to the air. This might be the prelude to an attack or a display of force. She could only watch, heart pounding, as the shapes swooped toward the Red Keep, flames licking from one dragon's maw. She pushed forward, speaking urgently to her guards. "Go to the dragon pit. See that Meleys is readied. If they mean to challenge me, I will not cower." "Yes, my queen," one of them said, though his voice trembled slightly. They rushed off, leaving a smaller escort with her. Now, she might have to defend it with fire and blood against not only the Greens, but her own cousin's daughter, Rhaenyra. The lines of war had been drawn. Targaryen ambition flared like dragonfire across the night sky, and Rhaenys, who had once wished only for peace and respect, found herself at the very heart of the conflagration. In a corner of the city, near the dragon pit, th.